Well, hello class. We are still here in Boston, Massachusetts, and we are now in that part of the harbor, Boston Harbor, where the Boston Tea Party took place. Although it was just a few-minute walk from the site of the Boston Massacre, we are now 3 years later. This is now 1773. At 3 years after the Boston Massacre, 2 years before the battles of Lexington and Concord, 3 years before the start of the actual American Revolution. But again, as we compress these events in time as a sequence, we want to see what was happening at this particular event. So, by 1773, the issue of taxation has changed somewhat from the taxes of 1764 and 1765. What Great Britain has actually done is Parliament has passed a tax cut. I want to emphasize that because often we think of the Americans protesting taxes or reacting to tax increases. What they actually done is authorized a tax cut, and it was a complete tax exemption of all British taxes of those who sold tea that came from the British East India Tea Company. This was the tea company that was about to go bankrupt, and they wanted to sell this British tea to consumers in the United States. But because of many of the protests over other teas and other taxations, and because of a lot of the smuggling of cheaper teas that were being smuggled in by people like John Hancock, that the British thought if we lower the tax on tea and actually enforce that tea, that they would sell the tea and have greater revenue. So why did the Americans revolt then against what was effectively a tax cut? Well, for many people it was the principle of the act of taxing, regardless of the amount of the tax, the idea that the British could impose the tax without the consent of the American representatives in the colonies. For other people, they had financial interests because only a certain number of people, a small number of merchants, were given this tax exemption. So it would have created a monopoly on the distribution of tea to a very few number of people. If any merchant could have gotten the tea tax-free, then it would have involved more American colonists. But by excluding all but a few, it angered the majority. In any event, when these 3 ships entered Boston Harbor, the laws of Boston were such that they had 20 days in which to unload the tea. What had happened by December 16th, which was the last day before the tea would have been taken off the ships and put into a warehouse, whereupon the local merchants who would have received this tax exemption would have paid the tax. So those who opposed it had to act immediately that day. In other words, if they had waited another day, then the tea would have been offloaded and the tax would have been paid. So they disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. Not really a clever disguise. No one believed that it was actually perpetrated by Indians, but it was done to conceal their identities. They boarded these 3 ships in Boston Harbor, of which this is a replica of what the ships would have looked like. And they took almost 50 tons of tea from these 3 ships and tossed the tea into Boston Harbor. It took over 3 hours, and the value of the tea by today's currency was worth over $1 million. So the thing I want you to think about in class is if the Boston Tea Party had occurred today, how would we view it? So it was an illegal act. It was destruction of private property. It caused over $1 million worth of damage to the British owners of that tea. Again, as we said, a host of personal interests. The governor of Massachusetts, Governor Hutchinson, The reason he insisted on having the tea unloaded, as opposed to other colonies like South Carolina, which had the tea unloaded but just impounded it, was that many of his family members were part owners of the British East Indian Tea Company, or had these exclusive rights to distribute the tea tax-free. So they had a financial interest in seeing the tea unloaded. But it took over 3 hours. They threw the tea into the harbor. They celebrated. The British reaction was swift and predictable. They closed Boston Harbor to offer the trade. They demanded that all the damage done had to be repaid. They revoked the charter of Massachusetts, and this led to what Americans call the Intolerable Acts, which brought us yet one closer to the American Revolution. If you're ever in Boston, I really encourage you to come here and take this tour. It was one of the best that I've seen. The tour guides are very informative and knowledgeable, and it's a great place any time of the year to spend a wonderful afternoon in Boston. Hope you're enjoying the course. Take care and be well.
Hey, I'm gonna throw some tea over.
Whoa, Levi. You threw that tea overboard.
Size and dimensions the Eleanor was in 1773. The beaver, the Eleanor,